The Front Room is a film about a pregnant couple taking their dreadful mother-in-law into their home. It has some clever ideas, but the tone feels pretty confused. Let's talk about it. In this movie, we follow Belinda, played by Brandy. While she and her husband Norman have a baby on the way, they're contacted by Norman's estranged stepmother Solange, played by Katherine Hunter. They strike a deal with her, allowing her to stay with them for the remainder of her days, but she ends up being an absolute monster who's impossible to live with. One of the big subjects of this movie is just boundaries. This movie is about the way that people impose on the lives of others by injecting their way of life onto them. But it's not just about crossing boundaries, it's also about the boundaries that we don't always set firmly enough. This movie sheds some light on how difficult things can get when we don't make them clear. In addition to boundaries, this movie has the recurring subject of motherhood. Belinda has a bit of insecurity about the child that she's about to have. Motherhood is something that she talks about through her work in anthropology. And there's a bit of tension between her and her new roommate because Solange seemingly wants to play the role of the baby's mother. This movie clearly plants a few seeds for some good tropes, but none of them really grow to their full potential, some of which don't really even exist for more than a scene or two. Like, the movie teases a pseudo-turf war between Belinda and Solange, and the potential for some supernatural religious horror, but neither of those seeds were watered enough. Belinda is way too accommodating for most of the movie, and the supernatural subject matter is a little more than sensationalism. The writing was also just occasionally a little bit dumb. Like, at one point, Solange is rubbing Belinda's belly while she's pregnant, and she correctly guesses the gender of the baby. What was funny was Belinda being so unnerved by this, like it was a crazy supernatural phenomenon, that she was just like, but how could she know that? It's a 50-50 guess, dude. It's not that crazy. The movie, unfortunately, doesn't get much eerier than that. And the dialogue isn't always amazing, including an epilogue with a bunch of exposition dumping to fill in the gaps, really ending the movie on a dissatisfying note. Despite the film being marketed as a horror thriller, which is kind of laughable, this movie plays out more like a dramedy than anything. I guess with some of the physical transgressions that it should be classified as a horror movie, but if you have any amount of tolerance for this subject matter, it will not feel like one at all. Through the movie's writing, performances, and music, it just doesn't feel eerie at all. More than anything, the movie's tone is actually really silly. A horror movie can have a sillier tone, but the problem is that the movie isn't funny at all. Unless, of course, you're still at the age where you think that poop is funny. This movie has a few scenes with excessive amounts of feces in places that are not the toilet, so if you are easily grossed out, you probably will not be able to sit through this one. To illustrate this, I'll actually straight up tell you that in this thumbnail for A24's second trailer, if it's from the scene that I'm thinking it is, that blood stain that you see, it's not actually blood in the movie. It's poop. So, for better or worse, Katherine Hunter does give a really good performance here. Solange is an absolute nightmare, worse than any monster-in-law I've ever seen on screen. But with the movie not really having many redeeming qualities otherwise, the nightmare of a character ended up being kind of a nightmare to watch. Solange is just too loud and too annoying. I'm not one to get annoyed by obnoxious movie characters, but this one really put those feelings to the test. Especially in this one scene in the third act where there is just so much noise from babies crying and whistles blowing. At this point, I looked around the theater and I'm just thinking, okay, is anybody actually enjoying this? Maybe to some people, Solange's obnoxious behavior will be funny at first, but like with any joke, if you constantly repeat it, it's gonna start losing its thunder. And Solange is just so consistently insufferable that with this being the focus and the film otherwise not really having much intrigue, it just feels like we moved in with Solange for an hour and a half rather than watching an interesting movie play out. So in an attempt to make tough circumstances feel tense and thrilling, the movie just ended up being noisy and occasionally hard to endure. I almost gave this one the lacking rating, but if we're being honest, it was actually just straight up disappointing. I think this might be my least favorite movie to come from A24. I've always said that their worst movies are still fine, but this one doesn't even get there. I'm honestly not sure who this movie would be for. This is the type of movie that would best serve the art house crowd, but I just don't think that there's enough that makes this movie interesting. For those of you who have seen the movie, I would actually really like to know down in the comments what you thought. If you liked it, I'd really like to know what you thought the redeeming qualities were. But thank you for watching this review. If it brought you any value at all, please give it a like. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see you later this week with my review of Speak No Evil.